Welcome to In the Studio, with a 21st century perspective on the greatest rock albums in history.
Excuse me. You're welcome. Guitar up. 1, 2, 3.
I'm Redbeard, in the studio with Pink Floyd's David Gilmour and Nick Mason, plus band co-founder Roger Waters for the highly anticipated Wish You Were Here Deluxe Expanded Edition. In the unparalleled Why Pink Floyd catalog overhaul, spanning 45 years of progressive rock spread out over 14 legendary original studio albums, it's hard to shine on more brightly than any other release. But the diamond that sparkles in anticipation of many is the upcoming 2-disc Experience and 5-disc Immersion box set of Pink Floyd's 1975 ninth album, Wish You Were Here. Following on the heels of the record-setting Dark Side of the Moon, Wish You Were Here was the second Pink Floyd album to employ a conceptual theme by Roger Waters, using the debilitating madness of Pink Floyd co-founder Syd Barrett as a symbol for the isolating alienation by the modern world, particularly the greed and insincerity of the entertainment business. The Wish You Were Here album debuted in the UK at number 1, followed by topping the sales in the US the following week. The latest figures estimate more than 13 million copies sold of Wish You Were Here. Readers of Q Magazine ranked Wish You Were Here at number 34 on the greatest albums list, while Rolling Stone writers listed at number 209 on their top 500 albums all time. Yet by the spring of 1975, the overwhelming critical and commercial success of Dark Side of the Moon and its subsequent tours had left Pink Floyd's Roger Waters, David Gilmour, Nick Mason, and Richard Wright emotionally and physically drained. Apparently, the band's soaring popularity had caught the Floyd somewhat by surprise, and they were struggling to get a grip on stardom. Here's songwriter Roger Waters with me in the studio.
They're hanging around as a struggling band. You know, they're 19, 20-year-olds or younger. They are often kids. You start the band, you start trying to write songs, you this and that and the other. You maybe get it. The end of that dream for us was Dark Side of the Moon. You know, Pink Floyd fulfilled its necessary function with Dark Side of the Moon. You know, a big hit record. Beyond that, I'm still surprised that I can make a living doing this.
Both David Gilmour and Nick Mason of Pink Floyd agree that the early days of recording Wish You Were Here were very difficult.
It was a very difficult period for us, I have to say. All your childhood dreams had been sort of realised. We'd had the biggest selling record in the world, and we had made money, and all the things that you got into it for, the girls and the money and the fame and all that stuff, it was all... Sorry, Nick, it's looking terribly embarrassed. Everything had come our way, and you had to reassess what you were in it for thereafter, and it was a pretty confusing and sort of empty time for a while.
There's perhaps a feeling that once you've had the big hit album, the next one should roll off a little easier. And in fact, like so many things, each rung of the ladder is equidistant. And it's just as difficult to make the next album as it was the one before.
Harder. It was just, the pressure of following something like Dark Side of the Moon. You try it one day. Yeah, you just try it. You try following Dark Side of the Moon one day.
We still are.
And after that single, that tour was a bit of a nightmare for all of us in some ways, because it was wonderful to have all those people, but they, from that moment on to this day, they never stopped shouting and making a lot of noise. I can just remember we'd sit up on stage in these places and look at each other going, Jesus Christ, when are they ever going to stop? And every kid shouting, money, play money, play money, all the way through from beginning to end. And it was unbelievable. It really was. It was a shock. It was a big shock, and that's changed our music. Some of the little things that we used to do that were incredibly quiet and subtle, little things that the audience would be sitting there listening, all these things going on around, total silence. We had to really cut some of that stuff out. It just became impossible, literally. You know, there's no point in doing things that people can't hear, and if that racket's going on, I'm sure that's changed the shape of our music to a certain extent. It's a shame in a way, but, it swings and roundabouts. You gain a lot, you lose a little bit,
Pink Floyd guitarist, singer David Gilmour explains the history of the bonus live tracks of Wish You Were Here.
The versions of Raving and Drooling and You Gotta Be Crazy, which appear on the Wish You Were Here one, I guess, which are both from the same concert, because those 3 tracks were the things we were working on in 1974, after Dark Side of the Moon and before Wish You Were Here. And one of them went on to Wish You Were Here, and the other 2 went on to the Animals album later. And so there are live early versions with different lyrics of those things on 2 of these albums.
Another strange and unforgettable occurrence happened during the final mixing of the song Shine On You Crazy Diamond, when an obese and balding Syd Barrett walked into the recording studio unannounced. The irony, of course, is that much of Wish You Were Here, and in particular the song Shine On You Crazy Diamond, was about the rise and fall of Syd Barrett, Pink Floyd's co-founder and original guitarist, vocalist, and main songwriter. None of the members of Pink Floyd ever saw Syd Barrett again until his death in 2006. But that hasn't stopped Syd Barrett fanatics from keeping the flame lit. Here's Roger Waters.
If our hobby is to be interested in Pink Floyd and whether Syd did this or did that, or what colour shoes he wore on March the 18th, 1967, or whatever, well, who am I to say that that's obsessive? I mean, some people collect stamps, you know. I mean, it's better than watching Ninja Turtles on TV, you know. Being a Syd Barrett fan seems to me to be a perfectly legitimate and reasonable way of spending your spare time, making a study of... He was a very interesting man. He wrote some fantastic songs. There's a body of work which is there, and unfortunately it is complete. You know, there won't be any more. He was a visionary. He was an extraordinary musician. He started Pink Floyd. Well, I mean, Syd and I started the band together, but if he hadn't been there, nothing would have happened. I'd be working for an architect now. I might be my own boss by now. I probably would. But I would not be doing the work that I'm doing, I don't think. He was, you know, he was the key that unlocked the door to rock and roll for me.
Performed live in concert at London's Wembley Arena in November 1974, Pink Floyd performing the then unreleased Shine On You Crazy Diamond, a full 10 months before it would appear on Wish You Were Here. It's now included on the bonus disc of the 2-disc Experience and 5-disc Immersion box set. Next, Roger Waters lights a cigar with his schoolboy exam papers, while David Gilmour and Nick Mason welcome us to the music business machine. Follow In the Studio on Facebook and hear more exclusive Pink Floyd interviews at inthestudio.net. I'm Redbeard, in the studio for the expanded deluxe reissue of Pink Floyd's Wish You Were Here.
Welcome back in the studio with Redbeard. This is David Gilmour of Pink Floyd.
I'm Nick Mason of Pink Floyd with Redbeard.
4, Wish You Were Here.
Thank you, gentlemen. On 1973's worldwide hit album The Dark Side of the Moon, Roger Waters had made a deliberate shift in his lyrical content, from the cosmically obtuse to the highly personal. Some of Waters' sharp elbows were evident in his amusing, not quite politically correct barbs aimed at the music business tycoons that were emerging by the mid-'70s. Pink Floyd's David Gilmour explains.
One would meet an awful lot of record company people who would have that sort of have-a-cigar mentality, and I don't know quite what made Roger start writing that one, but it was a very, very common thing in which we used to amuse ourselves with endlessly to prevent ourselves from being driven mad with rage about it. We had people who would say to us, you know, which one's Pink and stuff like that. They genuinely would. They think there were an awful lot of people who thought Pink Floyd was the name of the lead singer, and that was Pink himself and the band. That's how that all came about. It's quite genuine.
Sung by Roy Harper, who was recording next door at Abbey Road Studios. Another jaded viewpoint of the record business by Pink Floyd's Roger Waters with Have a Cigar. Following in the direction of Dark Side of the Moon, the Wish You Were Here album was the second one in a row where Waters' lyrics maintained a conceptual theme. Ironically for Waters, writing was one thing that Roger was not encouraged to do when he was a student in school.
I was told very firmly all through my school days that there was no question of me ever being involved in writing anything. You know, my essays or whatever would come back with bad marks and just hopeless, you know, forget, absolute write-off. So I would say, you know, to anybody out there who still is facing this problems with people who are not involved in education in the Greek sense, which is, you know, to draw out the best that is in a child or an individual. Take heart, you know, because I suddenly discovered that All I had to do was be honest and say what I felt, and I discovered I had a knack of being honest and saying what I feel and strumming the guitar or playing the piano a little bit at the same time, and I made a living out. That's not what's important, though. What's important is I think, for yourself to do it. If you want to be creative in any way, it doesn't matter. You don't have to be Michelangelo, or John Lennon. You can just be you and do it at home. Do it for fun. Don't give up your day job.
A technical problem took place during the recording of Shine On You Crazy Diamond, according to David Gilmour and Nick Mason.
I remember doing the backing track. We had one problem making the actual backing track for Shine On, where we had a new console in the studio, and no one was 100% certain how it worked. And the whole echo returns of everything that we were doing was recorded onto the drum tracks, which meant that when we went to the drum tracks on their own, when we finally took everything else out and said, can we have the echo off this or the echo off that? And they said, well, we can't seem to get rid of it. And we took everything else out of the mix and listened to the drums on their own. We found that there was this massive echo from other instruments all over the drums. So we did actually have to go and start all over again and re-record it. So there was a bit of cursing and swearing about that, as it had taken a day or two to get that track done.
We were
very happy with the actual performance.
I think also there was a point at which, with the invention of the 16-track and 2-inch tape, there was a belief for quite a while that there would be something intrinsically wrong in editing tape that big. So consequently, whenever we played these pieces, they had to be played through from beginning to end. And particularly for Roger and myself, as the rhythm section, which would be laid down first. This was a fairly tough business because the whole thing had to be sort of right.
And had to be memorised, because you were probably not listening to any other instruments or vocals, so you
Absolutely.
had no...
So it was a pretty weird thing. I mean, I don't think I could remember that much stuff now.
If you read some of the initial reviews of Wish You Were Here in 1975, you may be surprised and perplexed to find that more than one writer gave Pink Floyd a critical pasting in spite of the album's obvious popularity with #1 sales. Roger Waters reminds us that certain negative reviews may have had more to do with temper tantrums over lack of access than the actual music on the album Wish You Were Here.
We didn't do press, you see. We never spoke to anybody. I've got a very old friend called Gary Stromberg. In fact, he is the man who introduced me to my wife, for which I will be eternally grateful. He introduced us because he was employed on one of the tours, the Wish You Were Here tour, 1975. To do our publicity. His brief was no. And that was it. We said, Gary, we want you to come on the whole tour and deal with the press and the media in every way possible. And the answer is no. Can we have tickets? No. Can we do an interview? No. Can we take photos? No. No. All you have to do is keep saying no, and that's your job.
From Pink Floyd's Wish You Were Here album, that's Welcome to the Machine. Still to come, comments from the late Pink Floyd keyboard player Richard Wright, as well as band co-founder Roger Waters, show just how early on that cracks were appearing in the wall. Follow In the Studio on Facebook and hear plenty of additional Pink Floyd interviews at inthestudio.net. I'm Redbeard with David Gilmour, Nick Mason, and Roger Waters in the studio for the expanded deluxe editions of Pink Floyd's Wish You Were Here.
Welcome back in the studio. This is David Gilmour of Pink Floyd.
I'm Nick Mason of Pink Floyd.
Welcome back in the studio. This is Roger Waters with Redbeard.
4. Wish You Were Here. Prior to his death in September 2009, original Pink Floyd keyboard player Richard Wright went on the record with me in the studio to explain his statement that 1975's Wish You Were Here album was his favorite.
It's hard to say. It just happens to be the album that, for me, just from the moment it starts till it finishes, it flows. The songs flow into each other, and it's just a wonderful feeling in it, a band feeling, which hadn't happened on Momentary Lapse of Reason. I wasn't on Final Cut. I was on the wall, but again, it wasn't a band thing. And we wanted, both Dave and Nick, I can speak for them, I think, and myself, really liked the feeling we had on Dark Side of the Moon and Wish You Were Here. After that, Animals, we lost that band feeling.
And then I asked Roger Waters to describe the exact same period that Rick Wright, David Gilmour, and Nick Mason all agree resulted in one of their best Pink Floyd albums ever.
Dark Side of the Moon was really that was a band. But I think bands get together and they want to be successful and they want to be this and they want to be that. And I think with Dark Side of the Moon, we achieved everything that we could. Wish You Were Here was a very good title for that album and has been reasonably well documented in other interviews and things. I've often said what that album should really have been called was Wish We Were Here, because we weren't really. And already the rot had set in, and the only thing that was holding Pink Floyd together at that time was fear and avarice. You know, there's the fear that if you split up, your world will fall apart. You know, when you have a golden goose like Pink Floyd, it's very hard to let go of it.
The unprecedented Why Pink Floyd catalog initiative has finally made available first-time 5.1 channel surround sound remixes of the Wish You Were Here album, as well as mid-70s attempts at multi-channel surround called Quadraphonic. They're all on the 5-disc immersion edition of Wish You Were Here. David Gilmour sorts out the history.
There was a quadraphonic mix done at the time, I believe. We were always too busy to get involved in the quad mixes that we did of Dark Side of the Moon and Wish You Were Here at the time. You know, they came out on some strange quadraphonic vinyl format that at least 3 people in the world had players that could play, I guess. So it never seemed that sort of vital that we should get that involved in it. And the care and the work, you know, the care and the work that goes into the mix of an album is so enormous and so concentrated that having to then go and do it again for a quad thing that was going to sell 3 was not something we all got that involved in. But these things are still there, they still exist, and they're really good, and they're worth listening to. Dark Side of the Moon, of course, has been remixed to, and Wish You Were Here, in fact, have been to the modern sort of 5/1 type quad mix as well. And those ones have had a lot of care lavished on them. So if I were going to listen to one, I'd tend more towards the 5/1s than the actual quad ones. But hey, it's all there for anyone. I'm not sure about how objective one can be. To me, it's a matter of finally getting over being a little too precious, too careful in allowing things to be released sort of a little bit warts and all. And there are tons and tons of bits and pieces of music and film that we've never considered were right to go into our front of the pack stuff. But a lot of these bits and pieces are out in terrible quality on the net in bootleg form. And we figured we might as well, at this stage in our lives, find everything that has been done and put it all out there for people to have a listen to. As we started, we found more and more and more things that we'd completely forgotten about, and we'd be sitting around brainstorming sessions trying to remember titles of things that we'd forgotten about so that we could go and look for them, because you can't look for them if you haven't even got a title or anything. And so there are all sorts of little moments, songs, tracks from, you know, the early Pink Floyd, 66, 67, before Piper at the Gates of Dawn, and extra stuff, live things, other recorded tracks, Stefan Grappelli playing on Wish You Were Here, tons and tons of stuff. And we figured it's time that all that stuff was released in nice, good quality. The completists could have their way.
There's a fascinating alternate take of Pink Floyd's title song, To Wish You Were Here, featuring violin virtuoso Stefan Grappelli, stepping out on a previously unreleased version. It's now included on both the 2-disc Experience and 5-disc Immersion box set. I'm Redbeard. Glad you are here. I'll be back in the studio in a moment. This is Redbeard in the studio, thanking my guests, Roger Waters, David Gilmour, and Nick Mason. This edition of In the Studio is dedicated to the late Rick Wright. For interviews and exclusive live performances by the biggest names in rock, visit inthestudio.net. In the Studio is written and produced by yours truly, Redbeard, for Barbarossa Limited Productions. Copyright 2011, all rights reserved. Transcription by Jane Carpenter Brunette. Theme song by Andy Timmons. Be a part of the In the Studio network at inthestudio.net.